Shalom, family. Welcome back to the Kingdom of Israel. Today I got something a little different for you. I know you all are used to me running several pages of precepts, but today we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to have a few precepts in there, but I just thought it would be good to create a timeline, because a lot of what we deal with in reading the Bible, we kind of get misconstrued and we get lost. So I want to show you the creation of Christianity. And I know a lot of people would like to believe that Christianity was created by God. And to a great extent, I mean, there's some truth to that, but I want to show you how when you speak of it being created by God, I want to show you how it was created by the God of this world, not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as it pertains to like what's written in the Bible. So we're going to go through an extensive timeline. I've created a timeline to where we go into the depths of like creation, going back to time periods of like 30,000 BC, and then trying to bring it all the way forward, to where we are right now, looking at, the point of the matriarch against the, patriarch, and then the biblical description of the creation. So this should be fun. Like I said, being able to break out this timeline and also just looking to show how within the heritage of the Israelites in the Bible, how that heritage was hijacked. And it helped to bring about the religions that we have today within the Catholic Church, the Baptist Church, the Mormon Church, Seventh-day Adventist, Jehovah's Witness, the Pentecostal. It's like all of this comes from several events that transpired throughout history that a number of us haven't been able to like line up. So, I don't have all the precepts for you today, but hopefully I have a awesome timeline that will help you better understand who Israel is, how Israel became to be. And I'm not talking, when I say Israel, I'm talking about the people in the Bible, God's chosen people, okay? And being able to understand how they came to be, what the importance of it is, just looking at the entire scope of what's being expressed in the Bible, stepping away from the points of religion, but just coming to understand what is the intent behind these writings and who are they for. So hopefully this timeline will give better clarification, for a number of things. And we should come to see how within today's modern time, just how so much, has shifted, into what we see today. So we have the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then we have the God of this world. Okay. All right. So y'all just hang in there with me as I unleash this robust timeline. Okay. So let me start out with here. The creation story. Oh, and this goes because we have those that say God is a woman, under the matriarch, and then there are those that say, God is a man under the patriarch. So with that. All right, so they're giving me the warning again. So I guess I have to show myself just a little bit, and then I can put the image, back up there for you guys. But looking at the point of the patriarch, okay. Oh, so that also means I need you all to share this, share the live, because they will restrict the live. And you share it, so it can get out. Put it on the For You page, hashtag the For You page, because for whatever reason, they don't like the image, with the, they don't like the image, the way it's being portrayed, and they don't like what I'm getting ready to talk about. So let's get past the algorithm, you all, and y'all put it out there. So I'm gonna go back to the story now. So the point being focused on these two thought processes, even in the world, like God is a woman. Like, where does this come from? That we speak about it from the standpoint of the matriarch, or God is the man from the standpoint of the patriarch. So in this timeline, we look at that. All right, so let's get into it. The creation story under the Great Mother archetype depicts a primordial female deity as the autonomous creator of the universe, often bringing life forth from her own body through self-impregnation. All right, so let's take you to Wisdom of Solomon 14:11. It says, therefore, even upon the idols of the Gentiles shall there be a visitation, because the creature of God, they are becoming an abomination and stumbling block to the souls of men, and and a snare to the feet of the unwise. All right, so now let's look at this. Records of antiquity indicating a female supreme being or great mother goddess are found in widespread archaeological artifacts, and they are centered around mythology. So this is like, we have to pay attention to, they have these artifacts, but the main point is these things are centered around mythology, right? Particularly from the Paleolithic and Neolithic areas. Now, this is around the 30,000 BCE time. These include thousands of fertility figurines, such as the Venus of Willendorf, alongside representations of a divine ancestress, believed to be the creator and lawmaker, predating patriarchal monotheism. All right, so now let me take you to Wisdom of Solomon 14:12. The devising of idols was the beginning of spiritual fornication, and the invention of them, the corruption of life. So you all, we're looking at a vast time period right here. So you see, we're looking at 30,000 BCE, and there are these figurines, that are placed out to be a symbol, of what God is. And here we have, within the Wisdom of Solomon, is telling us that these idols, are the downfall of our kind. All right, so here, based on archaeological and mythological interpretations, the Great Mother Goddess was preceded during the Paleolithic period by more abstract, animalistic, or primordial forces, while the Mother Goddess emerged as a dominant figure during the Neolithic transition, her existence is rooted in mythology. All right. So here, Wisdom of Solomon 14 and 27. The worshiping of idols not to be named is the beginning, the cause, and the end of all evil. All right. So we also have to look at the account of man being formed from the dust of the ground is primarily recorded in Genesis 2:7. All right. Now, recorded accounts of a great mother goddess impregnating herself to create humanity or other divine beings, a concept known as parthenogenesis, virgin birth, or self-creation, are common in ancient, pre-patriarchal, and mythological traditions. All right, so you all may understand there's a concept called the Immaculate Conception within Christianity. Where does it come from? It comes from a paganistic custom and/or tradition centered around mythology. According to what we're looking at, understanding the virgin birth is something that comes from the great mother goddess. That's not, something centered or that came from the heritage of the people of the book with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or the Israelites. It was added in. Okay. So let's continue. I'll keep going with the research that I've kind of put together to show this timeline, and also just trying to understand within the religion, where did some of these traditions come from? Because the religion, you all, is totally different than the heritage of the people that's in the book. Hey, thank you all for coming, into the live. And I'm asking you all, along with all the likes and everything else that you're doing, please share, the live, and add the for you hashtag or for your page hashtag, all those things, because they've already given me a warning, for the content that I'm looking to express today. So I need you all to be, the leaders today and help me get this information out. All right. So now the question is, which God do you serve? The great mother goddess that impregnated herself, or God Almighty that made man from the dust of the ground? Okay. Now let's look at this. Patriarchal monotheism is traditionally first recorded with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the book of Genesis, generally placed by scholars in the early second millennium. Okay. So here, folks would argue that the great mother goddess existed long before the sense of a patriarch and monotheism. Okay. But one thing I don't think they're truly paying attention to is the fact that, yes, you have the archaeological evidence, but it's stated to be rooted in mythology. Okay. So, we now move forward into the sense of this monotheism centered around a patriarch. This comes, thousands of years later. Okay. So it says Abraham is recognized as the pioneer who entered a covenant with one God. Now, I want to bring you into All right. They just keep giving me this warning. I tell you, man. They want to see what I look like. They want to make certain, that they can have the biometrics, to make certain that they know, who's providing this message. It's me. Here I go. I'm not hiding, just trying to enlighten individuals. All right. Sorry, you all. They keep sending me the warning. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go into a primordial election of a people named Israel, a forgotten factor. Because in the Bible, although it goes toward the beginning of time, moving into this time right here, it's like we're not able to see where does this chosen people come, into play. And how is it that this chosen people seem to overshadow a concept of people or history that goes all the way back to 30,000 BCE? And the concept of a matriarch or anything that individuals would say, they believe in or they've come to understand their spirituality is centered around. So for this exercise, I'm using the writings of the Bible to show how the creation had taken place, a people were chosen, and how prophecy is being portrayed to bring us now to this day and time that we have a religion called Christianity, and so many people, have centered themselves around this way of life, not understanding how it was birthed, and then giving prominence to a people that God chose and named Israel, and how they are depicted, to be one of the last nations created, but yet the nation that's going to rule all other nations in the world in righteousness. All right, so here, primordial election of a people named Israel, a forgotten factor. All right, so here's the, thank you all. Here's the introduction that I put together, for that. And again, you all, they keep flagging and they're sending me these warnings because of the image that I have up and the content that I'm expressing. So I'm asking you all to make sure you share it so, we can get it out to our family and friends as we go through this timeline, looking at how Christianity was created. Okay, so the introduction, across ancient civilizations, sacred texts, prophetic traditions, and moral law codes, scholars observe reoccurring theological patterns. All right, theological patterns, creation narratives, divine judgment, chosen lineages, flood traditions, moral order, and messianic expectation. These similarities are often treated as evidence of independent myth-making or cultural borrowing. However, when examined through a biblical and apocryphal lens, a different explanation emerges. These traditions reflect a shared ancestral revelation originating with the earliest patriarchs, even Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. All right, this would be known as the post-deluge period. So the and the post-deluge is just speaking about after the flood, you all, or after that great catastrophe. This framework stands out to prove that an election, a covenantal purpose, and law of God were established before the foundations of the world and to be preserved through a chosen lineage, culminating in a people named Israel. So also showing how this people named Israel are connected to a divine seed, which is also identified as the Son of God. Y'all hanging there with me? The parallel traditions found among ancient people are therefore derivatives of an Israelite heritage. Now, you might say, well, how can that be? You know, when the Israelites came, Johnny, so lately, how can all these other ancient people be derivatives of an Israelite heritage when the Israelites didn't even exist? Okay, y'all follow the line of thought, you know, as we go to show it was always there based on how the Creator wrote and or put it in writing for us to have. All right, derivatives of an Israelite heritage, residual fragments of an original divine deposit transmitted through Noah and his sons. All right, so let me take you to pre-creation, counsel, and foreordination. All right. Now, scripture indicates that God's redemptive plan existed prior to material creation. We find this in 2 Ezra 6, 1 through 6. Affirms that God conceived all things before the world was formed. You all really have to go and look at 2 Ezra 6, 1 through 6. Also looking at Proverbs 8, 22 through 31. That presents divine wisdom as established before creation. Okay. Together, these texts suggest that the people, talking about Israel, the kingdom, and covenantal order were more than historical annals, but preordained events which shape reality. All right, God's relationship with Jacob and his descendants reflect an eternal design rather than a later development. So now I want to take you into the antediluvian prophecy and early revelation. So the antediluvian, this speaks about before the flood. Okay. Now, what we're doing, we're going through this timeline. I'm taking you into a timeline that goes way back into the beginning, and we're trying to walk and to work our way up, you know, to where we are right now, to like understanding how we have the religion that we have today and this practice of worship, you know, for God. And does it truly align with what's written, or will we find, you know, that man had, you know, a very instrumental part in creating, you know, this reality that we have today? Okay, the God of this world and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're going to try to distinguish the difference between who's who, what's what, and how we see what we see today. All right, so the book of Jude records prophetic testimony from Enoch, the seventh from Adam, who foretold of a divine judgment and the coming of the Lord before Noah, Shem, Abraham, Jacob, and the 12 tribes, which Christ came, you know, from the tribe of Judah. This indicates that covenantal expectation and messianic hope existed alongside the creation of Israel. Prophecy and revelation. Okay. All right. So prophecy and revelation. Where am I? Prophecy and revelation was not introduced suddenly as a matter of coincidental history. It unfolded progressively throughout the ages and generations. All right, so now, taking you into division of nations and pre-existence of Israel. We'll see this through Deuteronomy 32 and 8. It teaches that God divided humanity according to the number of children of Israel. This implies that national boundaries were arranged with Israel in view. Now, Israel meaning a people, you all, right? And this goes, beyond the created state, in 1948 and what we see transpiring today in what we call the Middle East, which is a modern term. Okay. This is like really focused on the true people of the heritage. All right, so national boundaries were arranged with Israel in view. Israel's future role was already established in God's counsel. All right, human history unfolded within a predetermined framework to be bound by a covenant. So you can see that in Deuteronomy 32 and 8 when you look at that. All right, so Jacob is later identified as God's inheritance, right? That would be in Deuteronomy 32 and 9. All right, reinforcing Israel's central role in the internal governance and rulership of the world in righteousness. I hope you all understand what I'm talking about when I'm pointing out eternal governance, rulership of the world in righteousness. When you read the Bible, it tells you that God chose a particular people so that they would have an everlasting rulership and they would transform the world transform and lead the world into righteousness. Right now, what we witness and what we realize, or we see all of the corruption and everything that's going on, and we want it to be over so bad, right? So these writings speak to how that's going to take place and who's going to champion it. All right, so now let's look at preservation of the covenant through a chosen lineage. All right, so now, from Adam to Noah. After the fall, God preserved his testimony through a specific lineage. Now, this would be considered the sons of God. Okay? So I want to show you how in that vast range of genealogy, when you open up, Genesis and it goes from, Adam to Seth, and you have all these begotten, and it just drives you crazy. When you're reading it, or it puts you to sleep, for the most part. But let me give you the understanding of like what that really is and why it's so important and how it eventually led to a chosen people. All right, so after the fall, and that's the other thing, we have no knowledge of what life was like before the fall. Our focus has all been pointed to look at the concept of after the fall. But at some point, we'll have conversations explaining like what it was like before, the fall. Okay. But right now we're into this timeline and we're looking at how Christianity was created. So after the fall, God preserved his testimony through a specific lineage, the sons of God. So we have, Adam, Seth, Enos. This is the lineage and seed from the sons of God. So you can see this in Luke 3:38, where it says Enos, which was the son of Seth, which was the son of Adam, which was the son of God. So these specific individuals are considered to be the lineage and or the seed pertaining to the sons of God. Now look at this. Though Adam had many children, because Adam didn't have just Seth, he had many children, but Seth was chosen from his seed as the son of God, right? Though Seth had many descendants, Enos carried the seed to be called the son of God. So when you're reading that and it says Adam had Seth, it also tells you that he had many other sons and daughters, but they weren't chosen. Seth was the one chosen to be the son of God. And what you're looking at as it says Seth and Enos, and it goes through, that line of individuals from, Jared to Enoch, we're looking at the sons of God. Okay. All right. So, this is what we see as it continues from Enos to Canaan to Mahaliel to Jared to Enoch to Methuselah to Lamech. This pattern demonstrates a divine election within a broader vision. So we now have to look at from Noah to Abraham. After the flood, God renewed this pattern. Noah preserved the law and the testimony. His 3 sons were privileged to sacred knowledge. Shem was chosen as the son of God. And from his seed, Abraham was chosen. All right, so again, as we look at that long list of genealogy and why are these certain individuals being pointed out there, it's because these are the ones that are said to be different than all of the other that were born. As Seth was chosen among Adam's sons, so Shem was chosen among Noah's. So now let's look at from Abraham to Jacob. This principle continued. Abraham had 8 sons, although most people only talk about 2. Okay, the 2 being Isaac and Ishmael, or Ishmael and Isaac, right? But Abraham had 8 sons. Okay, Isaac was chosen. Isaac had 2 sons. Jacob was chosen. Before Jacob, God had not established a covenant nation. God never dealt with any nation of people before he established Jacob or Israel to be a nation. And if we're reading that book and we're understanding the prophecy, it helps us to understand that this was something that was already written and or said to happen. It's just time had to unfold in order for it to come into full fruition, right? Before Jacob, God had not established a covenant nation. With the creation of Israel, God's election reached its national form. All right, so let's look at the flesh and the promise. Let's look at two lines of descent. So, Scripture repeatedly distinguishes between the children of the promise and the children of the flesh. So the children of the promise would be like, as you read, it says Abraham had Seth and he had all the other children. Seth would be considered one of the promise. All the other ones that Adam had would be considered the children of the flesh. All right, so examples include Seth versus other sons of Adam, Enos versus other siblings, Shem versus his brothers, Isaac versus Ishmael and the other 6 sons of Abraham, and Jacob versus Esau. This dual lineage reflects spiritual continuity versus biological descent alone. So for the children not being born yet, and I'm reading this from Romans 9:11, okay? For the children being not yet born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him that called. So this is basically saying God already identified what it is that he's going to do and who's chosen, for what. So there's really like no one thing that one nation of people can do to, position themselves to say, hey, we're going to take the seat or throne, of righteousness. Is, pretty much said it's already, marked out who's going to do, who's going to do what and for what intent, and or purpose. Okay. All right. So covenant identity is transmitted by divine appointment through the seed, and it's still beyond mere ancestry. So that might sound confusing, to a number of people. It's like you're saying it's through the seed, but beyond mere ancestry. Yes, because at one point it was coming, through the individual seed from one, like Seth and Enos. But then when the nation was born, it became a broader sense of the ancestry. So now inside of the nation, there are certain individuals of the seed that will move on and others, that will fall to the side. That's where the prophecy talks about 2/3, of the people will not make it, So let's look at development of early civilizations. The descendants of Noah established many civilizations. So you'd have to know, or you'd have to look at the Japheth and, his descendants, and Ham, and his descendants, and then Shem, and his descendants. But when you look at after the flood, this is where the new concept of creation begins through, these 3 being Shem, Ham, and Japheth. All right, so these societies possess partial knowledge of the law and prophecy. So basically, just kind of pointing out that you had Noah, who made certain his sons understood, law and testimony or the prophecy. But of the sons, it was Shem, who was actually chosen to carry things on. But still, through Ham, who is the progenitor of the nations such as Egypt and, within Ethiopia and those great civilizations, because we know, what great things they did and how they did it, but they weren't chosen, right? So you have that still familiar, something that's familiar within that, but it stemmed from, having Noah, as the father and the one who taught them, those things. But it would be said that within the cultures of like Egypt, that they perverted the standing of what the law and or the prophecy, would be, because it was truly meant for Shem, to carry it on. All right, so where did I? Okay, so these societies possess partial knowledge of the law and prophecy taken from their patriarchal origins. However perverted they may be. So that just goes into what I was saying as far as how, Egypt took it and they built, a great society, but they didn't have a complete understanding, or they didn't stick, to what it was said to be. So the examples include moral law systems such as Ma'at, in Egypt, because some folks will say, the 42 laws of Ma'at, and they'll say that came way before, a people of Israel ever existed. So the people of Israel are, copying an Egyptian system. And it's not that they're copying, the system, is that Noah explained it to his sons, but it was truly meant for the seed of Shem to carry it on. So when Israel did come into position and or play, they're now expounding on it. They're magnifying it. They're bringing it into, its full force, and the reason for which, it was created. All right. So then we have flood narratives. We have, the virgin and or miraculous birth motifs. We have the judgment traditions. We have the afterlife, doctrines. These are all things that we find different scholars and people arguing about as it pertains to civilizations and the different things that we see from one culture to the next culture. All right, so these reflect fragmented memories of the original testimony. All right, so it's like saying the sons of Japheth and the sons of Ham, although they had Noah as their father, and Noah, was explaining law and testimony to them, somehow as they went along, they engineered different things that they wanted to engineer to suit, their civilizations. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay, so it says, but something is missing: the sustained relationship by covenant. So when talking about the other civilizations, they have these understandings, but what's missing is the relationship by covenant. These civilizations reinterpreted divine knowledge through imagination, philosophy, and mythology. All right, their way of life was centered around idol worship, distorted reflections of truth, which would cause the world to be plunged into cycles of evil, which last for ages and generations. Y'all hanging there with me as I'm going through this timeline, trying to show you how Christianity, was created. And we're going to put this up on the YouTube channel as well. Okay. All right. So let's look at Israel. Okay. What is keep sending me all these? Okay. Now they restricting it. They restricting it. Okay. Boy, they interrupting me right now. Want me to hold on, y'all. Bear with me here, real quick. I'm trying to understand what they want me to do all right. Anyway. All right. They keep sending me all these doggone warnings and trying to interrupt my flow. Okay, here we go. We were talking about Israel and the recovery of the full revelation. Okay. All right. Let's look at that. When Israel emerged, many historians say it appeared superficially, to borrow from surrounding cultures. In reality, their thought process was in reverse. All right, so once Israel was created, it initiated the law of life. It inherited. When Israel was created, it inherited the law of life for a heritage. And all nations of the world would ultimately submit to this way of life. So when Israel was created, you all, it was not created centered around a religion. Their way of life or their heritage is the law of life. The law. That's what they are meant to live by. Okay? And that's what's written, the law of life or the heritage. All right, so Israel was handed the original framework from which previous cultures had polluted. Noah instructed his sons in prophecy and law, but only Shem and certain of his seed were called to maintain the fidelity of the covenant. Now, if you were here and you were able to catch the explanation that we gave to the line from Abraham to Seth to Enos, you understand why we're pointing out to say, from this standpoint, Noah instructed his sons in prophecy and law, but it was Shem, right? And certain of his seed that were called to maintain the fidelity of the covenant. Okay. All right. So it says through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, this fidelity matured into the first of its kind and national identity. All right. Thus, the people and the kingdom of Israel did not imitate ancient civilizations. Rather, ancient civilizations retained partial traces of Israel's ancestral revelation. Okay. Now, I know that may be hard for a number of people to wrap your mind around. And it's the point that the Creator had already established how things were going to unfold, and that this nation of people would be in existence and or play. So once it happens, to a number of people, it looks like, they're following a pattern of someone or something else, but it's like, no, in fact, they're fulfilling the writing of prophecy to then carry out what was said to be done. So I know that can be confusing, for a lot of folks, but let's get further into it as we go to, point out and or show how Christianity was created by the God of this world and not by the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right, so here, God's unique relationship with Israel. All right. Scripture affirms God never had a relationship with the nation of people before Israel. Jacob's name changed by God marked the beginning of Israel as a nation. Thank you all for coming into the live. Man, they have really restricted, the live. So once again, I'm depending on you all that are, in the room to kind of help me get the information out. Make sure you share, the live. And right now, I kind of want to make certain that you all can hear me. If you can hear me right now, just put a 1 in the chat real quick. Let me know we still up and going, and they don't have me just talking to myself. All right, there you go. I see you. All right, here we go. All right, so scripture affirms Jacob's name changed by God marked the beginning of Israel as a nation. All right, God's judgments are like a circle, emphasizing divine order. So we see that in 2nd Ezra 5:42. Okay, now look at this part. The elder shall serve the younger. Reflects the last nation named as Israel shall lead many nations of antiquity that were established long before it. Okay. I hope you all can comprehend where I'm going, what's being stated, and the importance of this timeline. So y'all just hang in there as we started out from 30,000, BC, and we're working our way down through time to where we're going to come all the way up through the 1500s and work our way right now into today's time to kind of understand what the Bible is talking about within law, within testimony, and what transpired within the invention of a religion. Okay, the God of this world versus the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right, so the children of Israel were chosen to be above all nations and lead the world in righteousness, justice, and knowledge of God. So now let's look at the source of historical confusion. Okay? Many historians struggle to account for Israel's annals and their prominence. Looking at spirituality. They approach ancient history through secular or comparative religion frameworks, neglecting prophecy and the birth of a heritage, right? Looking at the birth of a heritage because in the Bible you find where Jacob's name was changed. God changed his name to Israel. That was the birth, of the heritage. This leads to misidentification of origins, overemphasis on cultural borrowing, and equivocating in oath and the state of perpetuity. Okay. Let's see. By failing to recognize the election as a recorded historical driver, the people of Israel appear as a mere derivative of nations. However, with it, the children of Israel became the central axis of sacred peace on earth. All right, so let's look at why ancient traditions tell similar stories. So again, you all, this is a timeline that I put together. Okay. Hopefully you can, build off of the timeline and, give the broader sense to it, because I'm just trying to run through it as we only have, a short period of time to do this, right now today. So I want to try to get through as much of it as I can. Right. All right, so why ancient traditions tell similar stories? All right, the shared themes among world civilizations exist because all descended from Noah. Okay? And that would be understanding the, the catastrophic event took place. And from there, we had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. All right. They were exposed to the revelation at some point. They retained fragments of the law. Only one lineage preserved is the way to immortality. So of all the people and nations in the earth, there's one that their lineage is preserved, to lead the world in righteousness. And, that would be the people that would be considered to have immortality, as well. Talking about the transformation from these, this flesh, the terrestrial flesh, to the celestial flesh. All right, y'all hang in there. Hang in there. Thus, similarity does not imply coincidence or plagiarism. It reflects common ancestry and early oral traditions. All right, thank you all for, coming, into the live. I'm just telling you, the algorithm has really shut it down. I'm depending on you all to, share it, if you will. All right, so we can keep this thing moving and we can keep it interesting. All right. Let's see, hold on. They still shooting flags at me. All right, so let's see. All right. All right, in closing on this part, and then we're going to get into another sense of the timeline here. So, but in closing for this part, the God of the covenant line, that would be from Adam to Seth, from Seth to Enos, from Enos to Noah, from Noah to Shem, from Shem to Abraham, from Abraham to Isaac, from Isaac to Jacob, from Israel, the 12 tribes and their descendants. God preserved a righteous seed through a continuous chosen lineage. Though many nations arose, only one was appointed to bear the promise of the covenant, law, and testimony. Therefore, Scripture consistently refers to the God of Shem, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the God of the children of Israel. This lineage represents an ethnic superiority. Folks don't want to look at it or hear about it from the standpoint of superiority, being with any ethnic group. But if you're reading a book called the Bible, it definitely talks about superiority. And you see that when he tells the chosen people that they would be above all nations, that they would be above all the people on the earth if they adhere to his commandments. So here, this lineage represents an ethnic superiority, showcasing the sons and daughters of God. The children of Israel were chosen to preserve truth and divine guidance for the benefit of all nations on earth. Understanding this as the mission and will of God, it better prepares scholars, historians, and theologians with a framework to effectively speak on ancient history, religious parallels, and the biblical heritage of a people as the driving force behind a unified world. A people without a private interpretation, as we ultimately understand that faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God. So that would be basically just saying you would have a nation of people that are not dealing with their own interpretation, but they truly understand what the call and or way to the Creator is, and they're living that, or as he says, they're in obedience to the higher principles, his commandments. They're in line with the covenant. All right, so now let's look at this as we now get further into, the timeline, looking at, these dates as we work our way down into the Council of Nicaea, as we look at the Greek civilizations, Roman civilizations, how all of this, have impacted the world that we live in today as far as our thought processes and the things we believe in, especially when it comes to, this religion. So let's look at this timeline, continuing to get into it to understand the creation, of Christianity. Thank you all for hanging in there. Thank you for coming into, the live. Please share it, you all. Please share it, because it's just getting good, as we get further into this timeline to understand Christianity, the creation of it, and then who is this chosen people of God and the prophecy today, right? What's really going on that we can kind of see through all the lies and come to understand, what's really going on. Are you, the children of the promise, or are you the children of the flesh? Because I'm telling you, everybody is not a child of God. Everybody is not Israel. And I get it, when explaining this information, to individuals, there are only certain of us that are, that chosen seed, not trying to be arrogant or anything like that, but, what's his name? Adam, had Seth, and he had many sons, but Seth was chosen. Abraham had many sons, but Isaac, was chosen. So all I'm trying to say is everybody is not, of Israel or an Israelite. I get it. I ain't mad. We all have to be true, to our heritage, to our lineage. It's just trying to understand, what that is in this day and time. Okay. But we want to get through all of the confusion, centered around this thing called religion and how it has the world in an upset right now. More specifically, wanting to show you all that the God of this world created religion and Christianity. But, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he has a totally different understanding as to how things, should move and or transpire. So let's use this timeline to further get into Christianity. Was it created by God, or was it created, by man? And when I say that, by God or man, like I said, the God of this world. Okay. All right. So let's look at, as recorded in the Bible, Jacob was renamed Israel after wrestling with an angel figure of a man, and an event typically argued by scholars to have happened around the 19th to the 13th centuries BCE. The people of Israel became a kingdom with the establishment of a monarchy around 1050, 1037 BCE. All right, so now we're really getting ready to get into, this timeline here. All right. And you all may remember, as far as like, with the asking for a king, Saul became the first king, over Israel. All right, so the renaming of Jacob. All right, the Bible depicts this event in Genesis when Jacob returns to Canaan. This is thought to be a time before 1200 BCE, and some scholars, suggest the stories are later literary compositions. Okay, these are the things that they argue about. Man, I'm just going to tell you, it's really interesting how they've taken this, on, but they're not the people. But they have a lot to say, about the people. And this really is a part of the confusion and why, the truth, in its rawness must be revealed and or shown. And when it is, it just hurts so many people, their feelings and the way they thought things should be. And when you come to realize it's not what you thought, then some folks mentally, they just can't, they can't take it. All right, so here, let's look at the formation of a kingdom. The kingdom of Israel was established around 1047 to, it was established around 1047 to 1050 BCE under Saul. All right, the time span, based on traditional biblical chronology, this spanned roughly through 400 to 600 years after Jacob, all right, until the kingdom, although accurate historical dating of the patriarch remains to be debated by scholars. Understandable, right? But we have a point of reference when we want to deal with this timeline, all right? So the first external archaeological mentions of Israel as a people appeared in the Merneptah stele around 1200 BCE. All right, so for those that have tried to say that this is, some form of a fable and the people never existed and it's not history. Okay, these things are definitely recorded. Israel is definitely a people. They are chosen. We do have the recorded writing. So here, it says the kingdom of Israel split into two, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom around 930. Following the passing of King Solomon. So the split was caused by the refusal of Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, to reduce heavy taxes and labor burdens imposed on the northern tribes. So that was the reason and or, the cause of the split. So let's look at these, the underlining, causes. All right, so beyond the immediate tax revolt, the split was fueled by long-standing sectionalism. So these were the tensions between the two tribes, okay? And idolatry, which was seen as a divine judgment for Solomon's unfaithfulness to God. All right, so the split resulted in two separate, often hostile nations lasting until the northern kingdom was conquered by Assyria. Now, this was in 722 BCE. Now, I want you to see this because Ezekiel was a prophet during the Babylonian exile. All right. So he ministered for approximately 20 years from about 593 to 573. This is BC. So taken to Babylon in 597 BC, he lived among the Judean exiles by the Chebar Canal, warning of Jerusalem's destruction before 586 BC and promising restoration afterward. So let's look at Ezekiel 37 and 22, looking at the restoration afterwards. He says, and I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all, and they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms anymore at all. Now, mind you, within the modern religion, they really do not speak of this reunion. The way they tell the story is that everybody is going to be in some, reunion and or jubilee with God. That doesn't align with how things are written. And this is why we have to look at the way the God of this world, how they tell the story, but then look at how is it really being expressed within the writings coming from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right, so let's stay on the timeline. All right, so the Israelites of the northern kingdom. Okay, so the Israelites of the northern kingdom were exiled by the Assyrian Empire in a series of campaigns. With the final collapse occurring around 722 BCE. The capital, Samaria. So we're familiar with Samaria because that's where the Good Samaritan comes from. And, these were the Gentiles that a lot of scholars and, those within the religion argue about and misunderstand, like how these Gentiles were also Israelites, of that northern kingdom, Samaria. So the capital, Samaria, it fell after a 3-year siege, resulting in the deportation of a large portion of population to other parts of the Assyrian Empire. So y'all pay attention because this is the timeline as we're coming down to understand how Christianity was created. And in the creation of it, it's going to be totally separate from what's actually written. And we're going to see within the timeline who created it. Okay? All right, so this Assyrian Empire, was the cause for the collapse of the northern kingdom. Okay, I want to try and get through this, you all, as time is easing up on me. Okay. All right, so siege resulting in the deportation. I think I read that. Okay, right. So the timeline. While the final fall appeared in 722, deportations began earlier with Assyrian campaigns in 734, particularly in Galilee and Transjordan. This timeline coincides with 2nd Ezra, 13, 40, and 45. So again, you have folks that argue, that an exile had taken place, and some folks will point out the Barren Strait. But according to this timeline, we're being shown based on what's written within the annals pertaining to a people called Israel and how they're recording their history and the events that have taken place. We see within the book of 2nd Ezra, it's telling us what they did and where they went. And this is how they found and or made their way to the Americas. I know I just jumped ahead, but let me show you what it says, or how we come to that, point or conclusion. All right, so let's look at Second Ezra. I think we should read Second Ezra 13:40 through 45 to understand they were exiled. And being exiled, they decided to leave and go to another land so that they could worship God in the way that they wanted to worship God. And that land that they went to is what, later known as Turtle Island, or America as we understand it, today. So let's see. And this was back in 700 BCE. All right, so let's go to 2nd Ezra 13:40 through 45. So 40. Those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of O.C., the king, whom Salmanasear, the king of Assyria, led away captive. And he carried them over the waters. And so came they into another land. But they took this counsel among themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen. So here, they were exiled, by the king of Assyria and taken into certain parts of the empire. But they decided, we just going to leave this all together. We don't want nothing to do, with any part of their empire. He says, and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt. Okay? That they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land. So jump down to 45. He says, for through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half. And the same region was called Arsareth. Okay? So we see that it took them a year and a half to make this journey to the region that was called Arsareth. So these are things that, you can research and, you can look into, but it aligns with the historical account, of the kingdom, collapsing, and, the Assyrians, pushing them into exile. All right, so, okay, I'm gonna try and get through, go to some other points, of the timeline so we can move through this thing a lot quicker. Okay, so let's look at this. Unlike the southern kingdom, that would be Judah, many of the northern kingdom inhabitants assimilated into other cultures becoming known as the 10 lost tribes. Though archaeological evidence suggests a significant population remained, in the land. The Israelites of the southern kingdom fell to the Babylonian Empire in 586 BCE, following a prolonged siege of Jerusalem by King Nebuchadnezzar II. This conquest resulted in the destruction of Solomon's temple, the dismantling of the city walls, and the exile of the population to Babylon. So we're now coming to understand, for this people, they had a way of life. They had a heritage. They were, supposed to adhere to the law of life that the Creator gave them. But in so many instances and or ways, they wanted to live like other nations, and they wanted to deal with idolatry. And as we opened up, we learned that idolatry is the reason behind the fall of man. Okay? Let's see. All right. So here it says the destruction of the first temple marks a major turning point leading to the Babylonian exile. The exile began around 538 BC with the decree of Cyrus the Great, allowing for the return to Judea. All right, so that was looking at the end, of that Babylonian exile. And here comes, King Cyrus. He's considered the great because he was allowing the Judeans to return, back to Jerusalem and build another temple. So here we can find this in Ezra, number 1 and 2. It says, "Thus say Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven have given me all the kingdom of the earth, and he have charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah." All right, so the fall of Judah and the rise of Esau. Here we go. This is where it get good, you all. The rise of Esau. Within this timeline, this is where it gets good. And I'm just gonna be the spoiler, because I don't know how much time, I'm actually going to have to like get through it all. So the spoiler is the rise of Esau. That is the God of this world, and that is who's responsible for the creation of the religions. And you're going to see it in this timeline, because the whole while when Israel was in position and or play, his brother being, Esau, Jacob's brother being Esau, he was contained within his region. He was contained, by his brother, Jacob, or by Israel. But when Israel was conquered by the Babylonians, that opened the door. And that opened the door to the blessing that he had. And I'm saying too much now, which I'm actually going to cover within, what we're looking at right here. But we're talking now about the fall of Judah and the rise of Esau. And again, when it comes down to like saying Israel or Judah or Esau or Edomite, or we don't use that terminology anymore today, but trust and believe these people do exist, under modern nomenclature, such as, I'll just use as an example, Black, African American, or, we have Chinese or Japanese, or you have, what's another one? Even as we look at, Europeans, as Irish, and I mean, all of these are nomenclatures, but somebody's tied to the line or the lineage of Esau, and somebody's tied to the line and or lineage of Jacob. Okay. And you have people that are tied to other lineages, but we're talking about this timeline as we look to understand how Christianity was created. And I'm just telling you, we're going to see it was created through the line of Esau. Once he broke the bound of, his brother, and he became, he became to where he could live through the blessing that his father gave him, evil spread throughout the world. All right, let's pay attention to it right here. All right, so Genesis 27 and 39. And Isaac, his father, answered and said unto him, Behold, this was Esau, what I'm going to read. This was Esau, where he was crying, he was upset, because his father had blessed his brother, and he wanted his father to bless him, as well. So let's look at the blessing. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth and the dew of heaven from above. He says, and by thy sword shall thou live. This is one of the traits, that we should be able to look at and come to understand who Esau is in this world, because he lived by the sword. Okay. He says, where am I? Okay. And by the sword shall thou live, and shall serve thy brother. So Esau was meant to serve his brother Jacob. All right. So the lineage of Esau and the Edomites were meant to serve the lineage of Israel, the children of Israel, right? And shall serve thy brother, and it shall come to pass when thou shalt have dominion. So it's going to come a time when Esau is going to have dominion. He says, thou shalt break his yoke off thy neck, meaning you're no longer going to be, in servitude, to your brother. You're going to break the yoke and you're going to have dominion. And he's going to have this dominion by way of the sword. Okay. Then he says, and Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. That wasn't good enough, for Esau, that, he was, going to live off of, the fatness of the land, and he was going to have the finer things in life. He asked his father to bless him, and then he wasn't satisfied with the blessing. And behind that, he hated his brother Jacob because of the blessing that his father gave him. And Esau said in his heart, he said, the days of mourning of my father are at hand. He says, then will I slay my brother Jacob. So let me take you real quick to Ezekiel 35 and 5. Because thou hast had a perpetual hatred. This is talking about Esau. The lineage and the seed of Esau has a perpetual hatred for the seed of Jacob, or the children of Israel. And a lot of times, it's like we really can't understand why this is or what this is, but this is internal within a people. As we come to understand who is this Jacob and or Israel people, and who is this Esau and or the Edomite people, as we're not really using these national identifiers, within a nationality of people, here today. But because thou hast had a perpetual hatred and has shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity, in the time that their iniquity had an end. So this is Esau living according to the blessing that his father gave him. So you would really have to look outside and, based on the description, come to see who has lived by the sword, who has conquered, in that way to obtain dominion. Because the prophecy said that he would have dominion. All right, so let's look at it. Because we're still going through this timeline, and I want you to see, where Christianity was created. And I'm coming to the point of being able to show you that it was created through the seed of Esau. It had nothing to do, with Jacob. It had nothing to do with Israel. It has nothing to do with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It has everything to do with the God of this world and being tied to Esau, and Esau having dominion. Let's pay attention. I'm going to show it to you. Got it in the timeline. All right. Following the destruction of the first temple, Um, Let me see. Following the destruction of the first temple. Okay, that was around 587 BCE. All right, so the Edomites took advantage of the collapse of the kingdom of Judah. They occupied southern Judea, including Hebron, expanding their territory westward. The prophet Obadiah rebukes Edom for standing on the other side, celebrating the destruction of Jerusalem. Right? So here, in the 6th century BCE, and later when the Edomites ruled as Idumeans during the Roman period between 27 BC and 476 AD. So we're getting good, y'all. We're getting ready to roll into some things that we're more familiar with within, a actual study of history, even as we're dealing with this time in Black history, right now, but coming to understand who's responsible. All right. Now, however, looking at the concept of, these Edomites being Idumeans, because they changed. You got to follow that, that you have to follow within history how they went from Esau to Edomites to even being known as Idumeans, who are responsible for Greek and Roman culture and civilization. These are the people, that we should be focused on. And one other thing I want you to see is how they associate themselves within certain groups of people, and then they become those people, within a name or concept of civilization. Okay. All right. So we say, however, the Eastern Roman Empire continued until 1453. All right, so we were talking about the Roman period, which existed between 27 to 40 to 476 AD, but you still had the Byzantine, the Eastern Roman Empire, which continued until 1453. All of this is good, to make note of as we stay on this timeline to understand, how Christianity was created and who created it. All right. Thank you all for coming in, to the live. Man, please share the live, you all, because I'm telling you, I've received about 5 different warnings, right now while trying to, provide this information. One, they don't like the image, that I have pasted or put up there. And two, they despise the information that, I'm putting out. And all I'm trying to do is show a timeline. Okay. So you all make sure, you share it. All right, get it out there. Help me out, y'all. Help me out. All right, so here, the Roman Empire, following the Republic's collapse, began with Augusta in 27 BC, and the Western Empire conventionally fell in 476 AD, when Romulus Augustulus was deposed. The Eastern Roman Empire continued until 1453, ending over 1,000 years of rule. So I wanted to give you that, as a base to now work with me as we go, back to the Hellenistic period. Okay. But we come to understand this thing within the Edomites, Esau, the Idumeans, how they ruled, under this, identification of being these Romans. And you also must understand that Esau is the brother of Jacob, and the blessing that he was given by his father Isaac, and how he's living within the truth of that blessing, even having dominion to this day. So now we want to look at some of the nefarious things that he did, even in the creation, of religion, because Esau, based on the prophecy, this is the group of people that's ruling the world right now. As Job said, the world would be in the hand of the wicked. These are all things that are prophesized, okay? As we look at prophecy 2026. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Alexander the Great. Even he is recorded within, these biblical writings. Alexander the Great. We'll find that in Maccabees. Okay, we'll find that in 1 Maccabees 1:1. After Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came from the land of Kittim, had defeated King Darius of Persia and the Medes. He succeeded him as king. I jumped down to number 5. After this, he fell sick and perceived that he was dying. Number 6, so he summoned his most honored officers who been brought up with him from youth, and divided his kingdom among them while he was still alive. And after Alexander had reigned 12 years, he passed away. Then his officers began to rule, each one in his own place. Okay, they all put crowns after they. They all put on crowns after he passed away, and so did their descendants after them for many years, and they caused many evils on the earth. So this, you all, is giving insight into the Idumeans, giving insight into who these Greek and who these Roman individuals are, as we're calling them Greek and we're calling them, Roman, but, they have come into different cultures and civilizations, and they'll take up the name, of being a Greek or whatever. And they'll say, well, now we're Greek, and that's what Esau has historically, that's what he did, even as he infiltrated the heritage, of Israel, and more specifically, the Judeans, taking over the southern kingdom and saying, oh, well, now we're Jews, and we're ruling the kingdom of Israel. So let's look at it. Now we're going to look at the Hellenistic period, for those of you that may not be aware. And the Hellenistic period is when the Greeks were in position and or place, and they took, rule over the children of Israel. Okay, it was a different type, of captivity that they kind of were under in dealing with, the Greeks. It was kind of forced, basically saying, hey, either you do, what we have as a way of life and or living, or you lose your life. That's, pretty much what, that's pretty much how they did it. Okay. All right. So the Hellenistic period, 323, looking at that was 323 all the way down to 31 BCE. All right. Followed Alexander the Greek, his passing, spreading Greek culture, language, and administration across the Near East. So the Idumeans, these were Edomites, were forcibly converted to practice the customs and traditions of the Judeans around 125 BCE. So now what I'm showing you within this timeline is, although you had the Greeks that had come into power, position, and or play, there were, times when, that was kind of interrupted, within a short period. And when it was interrupted, you had certain, of the Idumeans that were converted within the Judean heritage. All right, so pay attention to it this way. The Idumeans, all right, Edomites, were forcibly converted to practice the customs and traditions of the Judeans around 125 BCE by the Hasmonean leader John Hyrcanus. All right, now following the conquest of Idumean cities like Marissa and Adamarim, Hyrcanus compelled the population to undergo circumcision and adopt Judean laws to remain in their territory. Now, some sources mention earlier partial defeats by Judas Maccabees. Okay, now this was in like 163 BCE, but the comprehensive forced conversation is generally cited around 125 BCE. All right. Now, the converted Idumeans became part of the Judean nation, and this event later allowed Idumeans or Edomites or Esau, such as the family of Herod. Now, you all read about Herod, in the Bible, because this is the one who told the three wise men, where's that baby, the king who was born? Oh, I want to see him. I want to worship him too. But his whole aim was to take the life of the baby. And the reason being is because, he was an Edomite king. He wasn't, of the line of Judah. And you got to remember, or he wasn't of the line of Jacob. And you have to remember that the Idumeans and Esau, they have a perpetual hatred. Okay. So, but the family of Herod, he did rise to a high position in Judean society. Herod was unexpectedly appointed king of the Jews by the Roman Senate. So these are things we need to pay attention to within the timeline to even understand, like, who these people are, right? Who these people are, how they came to be, and at what point did they infiltrate the heritage, okay? So we see it starts around the Hellenistic period. And within the Hellenistic period, the Idumeans had great rule, but then there were points in times through John Maccabee, where, Judas Maccabee, where they overcame, the rule of the Greeks. And then you had John Hyrcanus, and during those points in times, you had the certain Idumeans, not all, but certain of the Idumeans were converted into the heritage. Okay, so but look at this, because Herod, Herod was not of the seed of Jacob. He was not an Israelite, but yet, being of the seed of Esau, he became a king. But who put him there? It was the Roman Senate. So here we have Deuteronomy 17:5, where it says, one from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. thou may not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. So this is something we have to pay attention to when it says not thy brother, because we know within Jacob, I'm sorry, we know within, um, Isaac, having Jacob and Esau is still, not, let's see what is going on here. They just will not leave me alone. They just will not leave me alone. Okay, but where he says, which is not thy brother. In this point, because we love to say everybody's brothers, we all brothers. In this sense, it's pointing out the brothers are exclusively tied to the children of Israel. There was never meant for another nation of people to rule over the children of Israel. So when he talk about, thy brother, he's speaking specifically from that standpoint. So now let's look at Roman rule over the southern kingdom. Okay, Judea. This began in 63 BC with Pompey's conquest of Jerusalem, transitioning from a client kingdom under Herod, all right? Under Herod to direct, often volatile, Roman administration by procurators starting in AD 6. Now, this was under Pontius Pilate. We all remember Pontius Pilate, okay? This period was marked by heavy taxation, strict military control, and intense religious, social, and political tensions that ultimately led to the first Judean-Roman conflict. All right? Y'all remember John 11:47, right? And I'm pointing this out because it talked about Herod. He was appointed king by the Roman Senate, and he was appointed king because of the volatile state, that was recognized during that time. But let me take you to John 11:47, where it says, then gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees a council and said, what do we, for this man do many miracles? Okay, that was talking about Christ at that time. He do many miracles. They say, if we thus let him alone, all men will believe on him. So this was feeding into the state of how volatile, things would be. And here you had the council that came together based on these chief priests and the Pharisees, and they were like, y'all, we got to do something, because if we don't, the Romans are going to come in. But here, look at how it reads. And the Romans shall come and take away both our place and our nation. So you had those that were of the children of Israel, or, of the kingdom of Judah, that sold out. And they sold out because they were like, hey, if we don't do something about this, the Romans are going to come in and they're going to take whatever little position and or place, we have. But for that reason, Herod, became king. He was placed as the ruler over the southern kingdom, or over the tribe of Judah, okay, at that time. All right, so now let's look at the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE. Was the decisive event of the first Judean revolt against the Roman Empire. Okay, so we know the Roman Empire, we gave the time period for how long, that existed. I want you to see this in Matthew 24:2, because Christ prophesied, about that specific event. And Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Because, they were so excited, about the temple and everything. He says, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you that there shall not be left one stone upon the other that shall not be thrown down. So that even goes to this day in time where they try to, point you to some remnants of it still being in existence in the land over there. Well, those remnants are not tied to the temple. Those remnants are tied to something. It's tied to a structure that Herod built. And uh, they kept that in remembrance because Herod was not of the seed of Israel. Herod was an Edomite. He was an Idumean. So it was preserved and later misidentified as being a part of, the temple, but the temple itself, everything was thrown down. All right, so here we have understanding in that time, when those things transpired, Titus Vespasius, he led the Roman forces to then destroy, the temple in 70, AD. All right, so now, so I got about an hour left, so I need to try and comb through this thing so we can get down into the medieval times and, really look at, who created these religions and how it's all centered around Esau and how Esau integrated himself within the heritage of the Israelites and he became a Jew, okay? Not, truly based on the seed, but, from the point that he placed himself in that position, all starting with the Roman Senate, okay? And they created then the religion because they had control over the population. They had control over the people. So they created these things. All right, so we also know about Septimius Severus. Now, this was like the first dark-skinned, Roman ruler who reigned from like 193 to 211 AD. And it's funny how they depict him. I want to read this to you based on how they depict him. Because Septimius Severus, he reigned 193 to 211 AD. Now, here's how they say it, I'm telling you. Is recognized as the first Roman emperor of North African birth and descent. Born in Leptis Magna. They say that's modern day Libya. He was a Phoenician, Italian. They say not black in the modern definition. All right, so basically what they're saying is you got some folks that want to say Septimius was black, okay? So what they're trying to say is, no, he was not black, as it pertains to the modern definition. And I'm just saying this, nobody should want to be considered black as it pertains to the modern definition because it don't mean nothing. So I can appreciate them saying he's not black because they're trying to get you to focus on what his actual nationality is. And we all should want to be focused on nationality because black has no origin or meaning to anything substantial as to who a people is. Black has nothing to do with a Israelite or a Edomite or any other nationality of people. It's like really made up. Okay. But was the first emperor from the African province. Okay. Now, coming from Africa, we know it was a lot of black folks, over there, but they say not black according to, the modern definition. All right. So we get it. So now let's look at Malachi 1 and 4. Whereas Edom say, we are impoverished, but will return and build the desolate places. Now, this is looking at the fact that, the Roman Empire, it had fallen, and then you have Septimius to come in and, be an emperor. And they just don't have, the Edomites just don't have that power and position, that they had. You now have the darker nations that are now coming back into position and or rule. So here, look at Malachi 1 and 4. Whereas Edom say, we are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall build, but I will throw down, and they shall call themselves, and they shall call them the border of wickedness. So here, it's understood these people called Edom are the border of wickedness, the people against whom the Lord the Lord have indignation forever. All right, so now we're coming, y'all following this timeline, because now we're coming down to the dark ages and the middle, the medieval times. Okay, now we're coming down into 500 through 1500 AD. This is where that going back and forth, between the Edomites and, the other, dark nations have taken place. Now, mind you, the Israelites being of the southern kingdom, they're totally out of power, at this point in time. But, they do intermingle with a number of the other dark races and contribute to, civilization and the cultures and things of that nature. But actually being in position and or power, no, not like that. But they do, have influence, throughout these time periods and, being a part of, certain rulership and or, people that were ruling during the Dark Ages and the medieval times. And this is what's so funny about the timeline, and you're going to see it here shortly. When they talk about the Dark Ages, they're talking about black folks ruling. Medieval times, they're talking about black folks ruling. This is the way Edom, Idumea, Esau, this is the way they describe it. When the other nations or people are in place, it's the Dark Ages and the medieval times. That's the way they describe it. Let's look at it. All right. So, but anyway, so the point of the medieval times and the Dark Ages, that was roughly around, they say, 1,000 years. Okay. 1,000 years European era between Rome's fall and the Renaissance. See, the Dark Ages and the medieval times, that was when, black people were in rulership, or a darker skinned people were in rulership. Now, when the Renaissance time, came along, this is when they were reemerging, within position and or power. All right. But look at how, it's expressed, because we had the Dark Ages, the medieval times. That was around 1,000 years, European era between Rome's fall and the Renaissance, characterized by feudalism, the Catholic Church's dominance. It said the era was not entirely dark, you all. The era was not entirely dark, as it laid the foundational structure for modern Europe, blending Roman, Christian, and dramatic traditions. So when it talks about blending Roman, Christian, and dramatic traditions, all of this is pertaining to Esau, Idumea, the Edomites. Looking at the timeline, understanding how they integrated within different cultures, or how they were in rulership, how they had dominion, and how, if you look at Malachi 4:1, they like, okay, we fell, but we're going to rebuild, these desolate places. Okay. So when it talks about Roman, Christian, and dramatic traditions, these all pertain to Esau. When you talk about the Renaissance, this all pertains to Esau. Anything before that, they consider it dark. They consider it evil. This is how they think. This is how they talk. All right, so the Renaissance started in Italy during the 14th century, emerging from the late Middle Ages as the rebirth of classical Greek and Roman culture. So who were the Greeks and what was the Romans? These were Edomites. Historically, as we go through the timeline to come to understand, who's who and what's what, and how they've integrated within different nationalities, even to stand up and say that they are that people. You have Edomites that even claim to be Arab, as they positioned themselves within the Eastern, Roman Empire as the Ottomans, the Turks. These are Idumeans. They're not Arabs, but they've taken on, that heritage and that practice. And that's why they're the only ones that sit, at this day and time within the United Nations. The Turks. There's no other, Arab people that are a part of the United Nations but, these Turks. And that's because they are Edomites. They're the same people. All right. So the Renaissance started in Italy during the 14th century, emerging from, the late Middle Ages as the rebirth of classical Greek and Roman culture, art, and learning, eventually spreading across Europe through the 16th century. So this is the reemergence, of the of Esau, the Edomite, the Idumean, who led Greek culture and, the Roman, culture. So this is the Renaissance. And this is what they praise as, being the highest point of, civility and civilization. As you follow the prophecy, within Malachi 1:4, how they claim they're going to reemerge, once again. So now we go into just coming to understand, even as we dealt with that whole thing around the what was it, the Hellenistic, period, how they were in position as the Greeks, and how they came into position, as the Romans, and how they took control over the culture, and the heritage of the people, instituting the religion. So when you come to the first Council of Nicaea, held in 325 AD by Emperor Constantine, the first, we must understand that this is still under the pretense of the Idumean way, the Edomite way, Esau's, way of dealing with heritage, dealing with culture. Okay. So that council of Nicaea in 325 AD, this had nothing to do with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This had everything to do with furthering the rule, of the Edomites, their dominion, and how they were going to use, this creation within religion to do it. All right, so you all know much about the First Council of Nicaea. All right, but they also had, as I'm trying to move through this because time is short. They also had a second Council of Nicaea. You all, that was in 787 A.D. So you can look that up, to come to understand, the second council. But just know this had nothing to do with the true seed of Jacob or Israelites. This had everything to do, with Jacob's brother being Esau, who has a perpetual hatred, for his brother, and how they've implemented, or how they've come to understand that they were going to have dominion over the world and rule again. But remember the prophecy in Malachi 1 and 4, where, they said they were going to, rebuild, and God said he's going to throw down. But looking at the timeline and coming to understand who's responsible, for the thought of the religion, it had nothing to do with the people of Israel or the seed of Jacob. It has everything to do with the Romans. It has everything to do with the Idumeans. It has everything to do with the descendants of Esau. All right, so you got that second Council of Nicaea, which was in 787 AD. Then I want you to look at this point right here. So one thing about that, the Council of Nicaea that took place in 787. So let me see this right here. The Council of the 787 Nicaea is fundamentally remembered as the definitive theological defense of Christian art, okay? Grounding the use of images in theology of the incarnation. Since God became visible in Christ, he can be depicted. So, as it comes back to my understanding, that Council of Nicaea, the second one, this was more centered around how they were destroying the art, changing the images from dark people to, white people type thing, the iconoclasm whole thing. And this is where, the image of the European Jesus and, all of this is birth, out of, these atrocities. Okay, that's about the best way I can put it. But look at this, as it was talking about the incarnation, of God being visible in Christ, how it can be depicted. I wanted to draw your attention to Roget's Thesaurus in 1834. The Roget Thesaurus in 1834. You can Gemini it or Google it or AI it, all you want. In that Thesaurus of 1834, you all, the image of God is synonymous with, guess what? Who know? Who know what the image of God is synonymous with? Thank you all for, coming into the live too. But it's synonymous with Negro. Okay? So now, let's fast forward as we get into the Christian Crusades, you all. We know the Christian Crusades, these started around 1095, initiated by Pope Urban II's call to arms, at the Council of Clermont, and generally concluded in 1291 with the fall of Art, the last major crusader stronghold. Now, they say while the main Holy Land Crusades ended in 1291. See, we're moving up into this timeline now. Smaller and or related crusades continued into the 15th century. So these crusades, you all, this isn't the seed of Jacob or the children of Israel. You all, this is the infiltration of Jacob's evil brother who has a perpetual hatred for him. Okay? All right, so that's what the Crusades, were centered around. So smaller or related crusades continued even into the 15th century. So now we come to this thing called unum sanctum, right? A number of you may not know what unum sanctum is, but we're following this timeline to understand who's responsible for the creation of Christianity, because I'm telling you, it didn't come from God. Not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but it did come from the God of this world, okay? And the God of this world being, that led by, Esau, okay? Unum sanctum, is a papal bull that was issued by Pope Boniface VIII. He did this in 1302. All right, so it laid down dogmatic propositions, on the unity of the Catholic Church, the necessity of belonging to it for eternal salvation. All right, this is what we're talking about. These guys created all types of things, mainly to just keep themselves in position, and or power. Thank you all for, coming into the live. Man, I'm about wrapping this thing up. I got less than an hour. I got about 45 minutes to get through it, and I'm gonna do my best to bring you right on up into modern time, all right? So the whole point of unum sanctum, this is basically to say that your Pope, he's like God on earth. Everything, comes through, him. So let's look at this. The Pope further emphasized the higher position of the spiritual in comparison with the secular order. The historian Brian Ternsney called it probably the most famous document on church and state in medieval Europe. So this is where they're bringing themselves back into power and or position. Now, the original document, that of the Unum Sanctum, the original document is lost, but a version of the text can be found in the registers of Boniface VIII in the Vatican archives, okay? The bull was the definitive statement of the late medieval theory of hierarchy, which argued for the temporal as well as spiritual supremacy of the Pope. All right, so that's what the unum sanctum was all about, was to say this Edomite, this descendant of Esau, the Edomite, the Idumean, acting as if he's of the seed, of Isaac, saying that he should be the supreme spiritual leader of all people in the world. Okay, so we find that at this point, when it comes to the Catholic concept of the church, it was not created by someone of the seed of Jacob or Israel. It was created by someone of the seed of Esau. Understanding who the Romans are, and how they're tied, or the Romans being considered Idumeans, and these being the descendants of Esau, just following the timeline, you all. So then we have also a council of Pisa, Pisa, which transpired in 1409. You all can go and check that and do, or because of time, I can't get into all of it. Just want to make mention as we're working our way down through, this timeline. All right, so that was in 14, 09. Then let's see. Now we come up into 1402 as we deal with Pope Nicholas V. You all know what Pope Nicholas V is famous for? Now, I just want you to understand at this point, we're now looking at where the Idumeans or the Romans or Esau, based on the blessing that his father Isaac gave him, that he would break the yoke of his brother, which he did once, Judah fell due to the Babylonian captivity. That gave Esau reign to get out. So Esau out, he loose, he running wild, okay? That, they then, created within various cultures and or civilizations, reinventing, themselves under different names. Okay. So they became, the Romans. They became, the Idumeans. Oh, so here you have the Pope, in 1452. But I guess what I was going to say was the point of the religion, when you look at Christianity, when you look at the Catholic, religion, when you look at how they were given control over the southern kingdom and the people, of Judah in that time, they then created the way of life for all people. They are responsible. So when you talk about this concept of religion that individuals have today, it didn't come from Jacob. It didn't come from the children of Israel. It came from the infiltration of the Idumeans and or the descendants of Esau, who then came in and perverted the entire way of life. And then they started, introducing a number of the pagan customs and, ideals into these heritages, into these customs and traditions. This is why even within Christianity, you have the concept of the virgin birth, which I showed you earlier when we opened up, that was something that went all the way back to 30,000 BCE when they were all dealing with the great mother goddess, a part of that mythology. But somehow it landed, within the scope of Christianity, which has nothing to do with the concept or, the heritage of the people. It was unheard of, before that time. And there's just like a number of so many things, even when you look at the points of the different councils that they had. One of them spoke about how they even named, their dates for Easter and all of the other traditions that they have centered around their religion. It's all made up, y'all. You just have to want to study it, and you just have to want to look at it and, not just sit down and, have been fed these lies for these ages and generations, right? But let's continue, on down into this timeline, because we were talking about Pope Nicholas V and what he's famous for. We're now in 1452. Pope Nicholas, he's famous for the papal bull, Dum Devices. That's the papal bull that said, to have opened the door to the Atlantic slave trade. Now, where is God love everybody? Where's God so loved the world. And where's this loving, where's this loving Jesus and all this stuff that they talk about now today when, they were in position and or place looking to conquer, all of the dark races, okay? Using their religion as a way to do it and make people feel as if it came from God. Well, I do say it came from a God, the God of this world, as they put out unum sanctum, that he would be, that representation and God on earth. He would be the supreme. This is Esau. Okay. So that was Pope Nicholas. Then we have the Council of Trent, you all, that took place in 1545 to 1563. And mind you, this is the transition now from the Dark Ages and, the medieval times when, they say this is when the darker people, ruled. They was like, oh, it was all messed up, when they was in rulership. But when we get in rulership, this is the Renaissance and this is the rebirth of civilization and, culture. And, they've created all this stuff. But in the Bible, it says this people would be considered the border of wickedness. I don't know if you all missed that when we read the prophecy, from Malachi 1 and 4. But he said they would be called the border of wickedness. And when you look at how they rule the world today, according, even as we look at the blessing that he got from, his father Isaac, they can do nothing but evil. They can't bring, peace. All right, so let me keep going on down as I'm trying to get to, the end of this thing. Well, yeah, I'm at the end. Okay, great. All right, so looking at the Council, of Trent, so I can give a little bit about the Council of Trent. All right, so this would be, all right, so the Council of Trent, let me just read a little bit of this and then I can be done, was a pivotal 16th century ecumenical council of the Roman Catholic Church. Once again, these are Idumeans. These are the descendants of Esau. This is their brainchild. So when you come to look at the creation of Christianity, it was created through a Edomite descendancy. It was not created through any one of Jacob, or the children of Israel. Mind you, Christ came out of the tribe of Judah. He had nothing to do with the creation of the religion. It was overtaken by the descendants of Esau. When they were put in leadership, when they had rule, of the world, they forced all of these things into position and or play. Now today they are in rule of the world. And we have their traditions and their religion called Christianity. I know it hurts a lot of folks' feelings because we've been given, this warm and fuzzy understanding about, Jesus Christ, which I'm not taking anything away from Christ. What I'm pointing you to is the way you've been given it has been perverted. You're disconnected from the concept of the heritage. You're disconnected from the concept of the people. And you rally around the dogma. You rally, around these, what's considered philosophy or vain deceit. You're not dealing with anything that's rooted within the law of life or the heritage or the substance of who the people are, according to how it's it's written based on the prophecy. Okay. Right. So let's see. Okay, so 16th century, the Council of the Roman Catholic Church, it convened in Italy to combat the Protestants. Right, they were looking to shut down the Protestants in their reformation. Oh, I know what I wanted to get to from this point, talking about uh, Pope Nicholas V. This is it. And I'm going to kind of close, on this part, right here, because coming down this timeline, as we look to see who created Christianity, following the timeline, we see that it was created, through the Edomite lineage. It was created through Esau's, lineage. It had nothing to do with Christ. It had nothing to do, with Jacob, Israel. It had nothing to do with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I can just say it that way. All right, so going back to Pope Nicholas V, I want to take you through the scope of the man-made religions, because you had Unum Sanctum, that came out, I guess around the 1400s. And then, you had Pope Nicholas, V. And we also look at, as I'm saying, with Esau and the descendants of the Edomites, these Idumeans, and these religions that they created, starting, with Christianity and the Catholic, paradigm. So the man-made religions, looking at Pope Nicholas V, who was known for the Atlantic slave trade. So we start there. All right, so then we come to John Smith, you all. This was in 1606. John Smith created the Baptist religion. These are all Edomites, you all. These are not, any one of the children of Israel or the seed of Jacob. These are all the ones that were, or as God say, they are the border of wickedness. I know it's hard to see it, that way. These are the ones that have a perpetual hatred for the children of Israel, for the chosen seed and or the people of God. But they created this religion in 1606, the Baptist religion. God didn't create it, y'all. So all of you that's running around talking about you Baptists, you're tied to a Roman, Edomite, Esau. You're not tied to anything that's dealing with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph Smith, he created the Mormons. That was in 1830. Now you also have to remember with, a number of, God's people during this time, in the 16 through 1800s, were enslaved. Couldn't, were stripped from their heritage, couldn't, was not allowed to read, write. I mean, none of that. Then, upon supposedly giving the people freedom, they turn around and fed the people their religion, y'all. I know it's hard for a lot of people to understand, but that religion has nothing to do with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It has everything to do with the God of this world. Then you have Ellen G. White. She created the Seventh-day Adventists in 1863. Then you have Charles T. Russell. He created the Jehovah's Witness religion in 1872. All of these people are Idumeans, you all. All of these people are, when I say Idumeans, I mean they're of the seed, of Esau, Edomites. They're a part of that prophecy that said we're going to rebuild and we're going to have dominion. And that's all applicable to the blessing that Isaac gave Esau, that he was going to have dominion, that he was going to break the yoke of his brother that he was intended to serve. But it was going to be for a period in time, and then things were going to be put back in order, because as long as Esau is in rule, everything is going to be crazy. The earth is in ruin. All we see is destruction and calamity, because God said these people are the border of wickedness. Job told us the earth is in the hand of the wicked. We saw, based on the children of the promise and the children of the flesh, not everybody is a child, of God. These things are hard, for us to see with our naked eye. But when we come to understand what it means to exercise our senses, then, we'll have, a better way to internalize, these things. And then lastly, you have Charles Farham. He created the Pentecostal religion in 1901. So when we deal with the timeline and we come to understand the creation of Christianity, and once again, I want to thank you all for, coming into, the live. But when we look at the creation of Christianity, it wasn't created by Christ. It wasn't created by God. It was created by men. And these men who created it, they are perpetual enemies to the children of God. Anything they do, anything they create, anything they put forward, it will not prosper. Although I know it looks like they're doing well, as if they have all the riches and, they're living good, but all of that is going to be removed and or taken away, from, them. Thank you all for sharing the live, right? So these people, being the border of wickedness, nothing good is going to come from their rulership. So what we're witnessing in this day and time is the collapse. We're witnessing the collapse of, this people. Okay. Yeah, that is, the timeline. And with respect for the time that we have, right here, I just wanted to take you, going all the way back, to 30,000 BCE, and looking at the concept of the great mother goddess and how that came into play, and how we landed, on the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then, how that, was then taken over, and, the seed of Esau came into position, and or place in rulership based on the blessing that he received from his father, Isaac, and how that's brought us to this day and time, even under Christianity, which was not created by God. I know it hurts a lot of people to want to, or have to hear it that way, but if we're going to deal historically and go throughout time, we'll see the sequence of events that have taken place that, made it to where a particular people now today, which if we're following the Bible, as I stated, that's the whole point, and the position behind this timeline. These would be those descendants of Esau. And those descendants of Esau, according to the Bible, can't be trusted. Those descendants of Esau are considered to be, the evil existence, in the world. They're the ones that's going to be revealed. Okay. And they're the ones that are also going to be removed, from the, they're going to be removed from humanity. Let me say it that way. The Creator has said he have a, what was it? The type of hate that he have for this people is like, it's not going to end, and he's going to eliminate, this people. Right. So that's what the Creator has expressed. As we look at the number of things that have happened in this world and to us, as a people, and who's responsible, for that in this day and time, you all, is somebody called Esau. I know we don't use that terminology anymore. It's the descendants of Esau who have a perpetual hatred for the descendants of Jacob, the children of Israel. That's what we're looking at. That's what I wanted to point out by creating, this timeline. All right. So I'm going to put the timeline, if you missed it. Like I said, I went all the way back 30,000 BCE and brought it all the way forward, dealing with the transatlantic slave trade, and now to this day and time, 2026, looking at the prophecy and how we have a religion called Christianity, which didn't come from God. It came from the God of this world. It didn't come from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And just trying to show, beyond prophecy and vain deceit, how that happened. And looking at the way that prophecy even explains that these things, would happen. All right. So I'm going to put it up on the website. So you'd have to go, to the YouTube channel, which is the Kingdom of Israel. And you can put in prophecy 2026 and I am a Christian. That's one of the videos that's already up there. And I tell you to do it that way because if you just go to YouTube and you do a search for the Kingdom of Israel, it's not going to take you to, the channel. You'll have to put in one of the titles, to the video in order to get to the channel. Then you can see, all the other ones. But this one with the complete timeline, as I laid it out today, if you missed anything, it's going to be up there. Okay. But again, you would look for the Kingdom of Israel, prophecy 2020. No, the Kingdom of Israel, I am a Christian, prophecy 2026. That'll take you, to the channel. All right. I thank you all. We're not going to open up the floor for questions for a Q&A, today because, of the time, so much time being, spent with it. But I appreciate, everyone for coming into the live, for sharing the live. Man, today, it was like an assault, on what I was trying to put out. The algorithm sent, about 7 different warnings and, telling me I'm gonna have to do an appeal and, all of this because of the image, and the message that I wanted to put out, today. I appreciate you all for your comments, and for taking this time, today. All right, that's really all I got. I'll try to look at some of these comments that you guys have, put up in here, and see what you all are talking about. All right. But outside of that, I'm going to call it a day. Shalom, everybody. And, God willing, we'll be back on the following Sabbath, and we'll continue this prophecy 2026. Thank you all.